The city of Cupertino has spent nearly $30 million over the past 25 years to acquire land in the Stevens Creek corridor for community use. With the land, the city also acquired 3 residences, 2 businesses, and a restaurant bar that is leased to a private operator. The golf course and most buildings on the property are in need of extensive renovations that would ideally serve a 30-year useful life. The question then is, do we simply repair or rebuild the existing facilities as they are, or consider other needed community amenities? The City Council has identified a number of goals for this project. Of primary interest is to engage the community in the planning for this important amenity. Other goals to consider as you prepare your vision submittal are: invite members of the community to enjoy the property in the corridor year-round, serve more people. Minimize the effects of park operation on surrounding residents. Preserve and restore the natural environment of the creek corridor for park users and as a habitat for wildlife. Provide a trail compatible with the natural setting that will accommodate a variety of trail users. Acknowledge and interpret the history of the area through a series of historical markers and through the preservation of buildings at McClellan Ranch and other creative ideas. Encourage educational uses of the creek corridor and support environmental programming at McClellan Ranch. Analyze relocating the Blackberry Farm entrance to Stevens Creek Boulevard. Consider what other recreational amenities are needed in the community and how the Stevens Creek corridor fits into the overall park and recreation offerings in Cupertino.
Hi, I'm David Fox. I'm a landscape architect and I'll be walking with you through the site today. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to the project area, to talk to some folks and give you some information about the site and about the area. We'll be talking with several people at different spots throughout the project area. It would be good for you to come down and visit the site. There's no substitute for visiting a site and getting familiar with it before you start to program your designs. As a designer, you need to be as informed as possible, and part of that information needs to be a familiarity with the existing conditions on any design site. Come down, take a look at the trees, hear the birds, feel the wind, look at the creek, look at the meadows, look at the golf course, look at the existing buildings. Become intimately familiar with your surroundings. That way, when you go back and start to program your designs and to look at the results of your site analysis, you can present a coherent, cohesive design.
Stevens Creek is a spring-fed perennial stream that flows northeast from the Santa Cruz Mountains to San Francisco Bay through the cities of Cupertino, Los Altos, Sunnyvale, and Mountain View. The creek is the unifying element that ties together the city-owned parcels being master planned as a part of this effort: McClellan Ranch, Blackberry Farm and Golf Course, and the Sims and Stocklmeir properties.
We're down here on the banks of Stevens Creek. I'm down here with Jonna Sokel and Barbara Banfield. And Barbara's going to talk a little bit about the educational opportunities, and Jonna's going to talk about the habitat and the ecology. Jonna?
Hi, Stevens Creek is one of the finest riparian habitats in Santa Clara Valley. It flows from Montebello Ridge up near Page Mill and makes a sweeping arc through the Santa Cruz Mountains before it descends into the valley floor. As you can see around us, the creek is covered with sycamore trees and oaks, as well as a wonderful understory here. That habitat provides home to several endangered species, as well as many common species that you find in your backyard throughout the Cupertino community. Some of the endangered species include the California steelhead trout, which lives in the ocean and then comes to Stevens Creek to spawn. It's also habitat for the western pond turtle, which is a rare species. It lives along the banks of the creek and crawls out into the open meadow to lay its eggs. Two very important species that you'll want to consider as you plan for the corridor. The other thing that you might want to consider is access down to the creek for people, as well as restoration opportunities for the creek. We'll be looking at a couple of other spots, but although this is one of the best habitats, there are still ways to improve it. Some of the concrete and artificial structures within the corridor could be removed. Native plants could be added to those areas that are barren along the creek, and non-native invasive species like some of the ivies that you'll see frequently along the corridor could be removed. So those are other things to take into consideration during your design process.
Thanks, Jonna. Barbara, could you tell us a little bit about the educational opportunities that being near the creek here affords?
I'd be happy to. For over 20 years, this site has been used for education. A lot of youth groups come here, scouts and other groups. School groups use it heavily. Every third grade class in Cupertino Union School District has been coming out here to do a creek study. It's a big program, and the school district really feels it enhances their science education. High school students come here. And then, of course, a lot of adults, amateur naturalists and bird watchers really enjoy the place. And we'd like to keep it that way and expand on those educational opportunities. If you remember, one of the council goals is for improved environmental education and expanded environmental educational opportunities.
Great, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about access down to the creek. There's a couple of things that you have to consider when you're talking about access. The first is, how are people going to access it? Are they going to be on foot? Are they going to be on bicycles? Or are they going to be in cars? The thing to remember there is that a person on foot has a vastly different requirement for access than does a car or does a bike. The car would be the most impactful, and the person on foot would be the least. The other thing to remember and to consider would be the ages and the abilities of the people accessing the creek. Something that is accessible to a teenager, to a young person, might not be accessible for an elderly person or for a very young child. So when you're thinking about designing access to the creek from a transportation point of view, readily identify and precisely identify the kinds of transportation you're going to have: cars, bikes, people, and then carefully consider how you're going to get down to the creek in terms of the ages and the abilities of the people. Another thing to consider for the creek would be this: it's easy to disturb a place and it's very difficult to restore it. Try not to bring in artificial structures. Try not to disturb the erosion or the drainage patterns. It's important for you to come down here and look at the creek. Familiarize yourself with the banks, with the creek, with the way that the banks interface with the land above. Stay away from steep places. Try to access the creek during flatter places. Familiarizing yourself with the topography and the way that the creek runs through the corridor will help you design the area. We're across the street from the McClellan Ranch in front of the Deep Cliff Golf Course. One of the council goals is to establish a trail through the corridor, and Jonna Soquel is going to speak to that. Jonna?
Yes, we're in front of a piece of private property that the council has explored as an extension for a trail through the corridor. That road is a haul road, which is behind us, that connects up to Linda Vista Park. And I mention that because you might want to consider the connections of your trails through the McClellan and Blackberry Farm area to this point, and how might you like to bring trail users to this facility. That'll be a connection, as well as a connection out on Stevens Creek Boulevard, and we'll talk a bit about that when we get to that stretch of the corridor.
McClellan Ranch was a horse ranch during the 30s and 40s, but was designated a nature preserve in 1976 by ordinance of the Cupertino City Council. There is a master plan for McClellan Ranch, and a full copy of it is included in your kit. On the site are the original ranch house, milk barn, livestock barn, and 2 historic buildings that have been moved to the site from other areas in the city. The Bear Blacksmith Shop, originally located at De Anza and Stevens Creek Boulevards, and the old water tower from the Parish Ranch. These buildings have been integrated into the park. The ranch house provides office space for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. McClellan Ranch is also home to Rolling Hills 4-H, the Junior Nature Museum, and the community gardens.
We're back with Barbara Banfield, the naturalist for the city of Cupertino, and she's going to be talking to us about the educational programs that take place here at the Nature Museum. Barbara, could you touch on some of the things that you do here, the kind of programs that you have, and the kind of people that show up for those programs?
We get a lot of group use here. I have school groups, everything from preschools to elementary school on up to high school groups come down here. I have between 2,000 and 3,000 school visits, students come here a year. And then there are camps that use it. The camps have morning and afternoon sessions, and sometimes up to 40 kids are here at a time. There are weekend programs that use this area in the Nature Museum, the inside. And know we want to plan for more programs in the future. And right now, it's a little tight. This building, this room here is about 21 by 21. And sometimes when you fill a school bus, that may be 65 or 70 kids that are here. And if the weather isn't nice enough to stay outside, we're kind of crammed in there. But I know in the future we want to start thinking about a better facility because the council goals really support environmental education here. There's a lot of community support for it, and we just need a better facility. It's in the master plan to try to accommodate programs.
Thank you. When you're thinking about programming in space, Barbara mentioned that sometimes you'll have up to 70 kids in a class. The room here is about 400 square feet. 400 square feet is about the same size as a regular residential garage. So when you're looking at creating space for an educational function, do a little bit of investigation. Do a little bit of investigation about the amount of people that are going to be here, the type of programs that are being done, and the type of facility they're going to need. We're here now with Christine Jeffers and Barbara Banfield. And Christine, I see that there are quite a few historic buildings here around us. We have the Blacksmith Shop and the big barn and the milk house over there. Could you tell us a little bit about these structures?
Sure, David. I'd like to do that. The barn was built in the early decade of the 20th century, around 1901 to 1909, and physical evidence tells us this about the barn. The horse stalls were added in 1955 when this property was privately owned and used as a horse ranch. The milk house and the water tower were actually built around the 30s, late 40s, when the twin dairy farms was here and located on this property. And the ranch house dates to about that same period. And again, physical evidence of the architecture is what points us in that direction. Behind me here, we have a replica of a blacksmith shop. This is a replica of a blacksmith shop that was originally built by William Bear and existed up on the corners of Stevens Creek and De Anza Boulevards in 1888. The replica was built by William's son, Charlie. Charlie built the replica and had it in his backyard, and then it was moved here to McClellan Ranch Park in the 1970s. The replica is built to scale, but it is 1/4 the size of the original blacksmith shop. And now Barbara Banfield will tell us a little bit about what's inside.
The blacksmith shop's now closed because it's structurally unsound. But inside, there's a wealth of old blacksmithing tools. There's a forge, anvil, of course, big bellows, and drill press, lathe, a lot of antique things. We can't show those to the public because of the state of the building, but occasionally we do use this site for blacksmithing demonstrations. Just this weekend, 100 people came out and watched a blacksmith forge some implements out in front. There are a few problems with the existing design of the building for indoor blacksmithing demonstrations. The false front you see up here kind of blocks the flow of air over the flue, and so the forge inside doesn't draw well. Possibly if this were rebuilt and rotated, we could get a better airflow and it would be less smoky inside during demonstrations.
Other community groups at McClellan Ranch include Rolling Hills 4-H and the Community Gardens. Rolling Hills 4-H Club has been active since 1974 and currently uses approximately 7/8 of an acre of the ranch for their program. The Community Gardens program, which began in 1974, has 130 participants organically gardening on 60 garden plots.
When you're considering moving structures, there are several things that you do have to consider. The first would be, is it historic? And the second would be, is it in its original position or has it been moved? The other thing to consider about buildings is their setting. Do they relate to other buildings in some functional way? Do they relate to some buildings in some aesthetic way? When you're thinking about moving a structure that can be moved that is not historic and in its original position, try to think about the function that it serves, the aesthetic purpose that it serves, and whether it depends on the other buildings around it for that function or for that aesthetic. Taking a building and moving it out of its position, moving it away from the things that support it or it supports, doesn't serve to enhance the function of the building or the other buildings that it leaves. So from a site analysis point of view, try to take a look at the entire area and not just one building itself. I'm standing here in the corridor with the creek behind me, and I want to talk a little bit about site analysis. Site analysis is the process that a designer goes through to gather information about a project site in order to come up with a design. One of the things that you'll have to do as a designer is to become intimately knowledgeable about the site itself. And we've said several times in the video now that you need to come down and visit the site. That's a given. You need to be down here visiting. Another thing that you need to do is take a look around when you're down here. Take a look at all the elements that make up this site. There are trees, there's tree canopy, there's undergrowth, there's the meadow floor. There are structures such as the community gardens, McClellan Ranch, the Blackberry Farm. All of those things are givens. In your packet, you'll have information about items that cannot be moved and items that can be moved. The historic buildings, for instance, would be an item that cannot be moved. The creek is an example of something that cannot be moved. When you're doing a site analysis, think of it this way. If you're walking into your living room and you're trying to decide where to put a sofa, you take a look at the windows, you take a look at the doors, you take a look at the way that the light falls into the room. You're doing a site analysis. You're analyzing that room to discover where you could best place that sofa. The same thing is true here in the corridor. You have to come out and see the existing structures. You have to come out and see the existing conditions. Be aware of where the sun is, where the shadows fall, where the tree canopies are the densest, where the creek runs, how it sounds, where it sounds the best. Over in the picnic areas, where do they exist now? Where do they exist in relationship to the creek? Also with the golf course, how is it running now? How does it relate to all of the other things within the corridor? When you're doing a site analysis, keep good notes. It's very easy to discover something on the site, and you can say, I see, the sun falls in that direction over there, and the shadows fall this way. It's difficult when you get back and started to do your design to remember the way that things were. Bring a camera, take pictures, take notes. Two people can site analyze a site this large much better than one person can. The key thing about site analysis is to write down every intimate detail about the site. When you're going back and designing, you're designing static elements into a fluid landscape. The things that you're designing here are going to have permanence. This is a tremendous asset to the community. Remember that when you're designing here, you're not designing for the now, you're designing for generations to come, and the decisions that you make can affect this area for as long as people are going to live around here. So in front, doing a site analysis, doing a good site analysis, knowing what is here, why it's here, and why you think it should stay or go or be changed will help your design to be successful.
There is the 2.55-acre floodplain parcel owned by the Santa Clara Valley Water District within the study area that has been leased to the City of Cupertino since 1974. The current lease runs through 2024. The Water District will not allow permanent structures on this land, but will consider uses such as picnic areas, trails, gardens, and other flexible uses.
You'll see on your site analysis map a 2.5-acre parcel next to the community gardens that the City of Cupertino has leased from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. I'm here today with Pat Showalter and Scott Akins from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and Pat's going to speak to some flood issues. Pat?
Hi, thank you. The Water District is really glad that the City of Cupertino is instituting this planning process. This segment of stream is in a fairly natural state. It's a stream that hasn't been lined with concrete or to make it better for flood protection, or many of its banks haven't been armored with concrete or sackcrete to protect it from erosion. In this section of the creek can meander, it can flood, and it provides a great habitat for our local wildlife. We're really pleased to have this opportunity to work with the City of Cupertino and the residents to improve this habitat even better. One of the things that might be included in this is a buffer of native plants that go along almost the whole reach. Native plants provide a great filtering system for water that flows overland into the stream. And basically, these plants kind of slow down the flow of water. And by slowing down the flow, the water has more time to percolate, and there's more time for the plants to use the water. So the water that actually makes it to the creek is cleaner, and it's less turbid or less cloudy. And it turns out that that's real important for the steelhead because they need the visibility in order to feed. So we're real pleased to be able to take part in this. One of the things we'd like you to consider when you're looking through your packets is the area that actually does flood. You'll see a map in your packet that shows the FEMA 1% flood area. 1% flood is the flood that's believed to have a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. Sometimes it's called the 100-year flood. So when you're siting facilities that are expensive, you might want to think about putting them outside of this zone. There's flooding that occurs, of course, more frequently, but it's much more localized. And here's Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Aiken with Santa Clara Valley Water District, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fisheries resources that exist in this part of Stevens Creek. Stevens Creek is home to one of the best populations of steelhead trout in Santa Clara County, and this part of Stevens Creek is a critical part of their habitat. This is the part of the stream where adults migrate and spawn and young rear, and so work that goes on in this part of the stream has a significant impact on their survivability. And we'd like you to consider, as you begin to envision what you'd like for this portion of the park to consist of, what kind of activities you may be encouraging in and around the streams. We would like to encourage you to try to maintain as much of a natural habitat along the stream channel as possible, provides food and shelter for the young trout, and then also the kinds of recreational activities and other things that might be occurring along the stream channel that might also contribute to increased sediment, as Pat suggested, or other kinds of impacts that could reduce the suitability of this habitat. And so good luck with your project, and we're looking forward to working with the City of Cupertino.
One of the things to remember about this 2.5 acre parcel is that it is on lease from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and as such, no permanent structures can be built here. Certainly the parcel is open for activities such as picnicking, trails, and other recreational uses, but no permanent structures.
Our tour of the property continues north toward Blackberry Farm. Blackberry Farm began operation in the early 1950s as a family-owned business. In 1990, the Nelson family approached the City of Cupertino with the intent of selling the property as open space or to a developer for housing. The community was successful in passing Bond Measure T to purchase the land in 1991 for $18 million. As a result of the bond measure, the city committed to a 2.4% utility tax for 25 years. The campaign literature in support of Bond Measure T stated that revenue from Blackberry Farm operations could help offset the cost of acquisition. The City Council would like to maintain a revenue-generating aspect of the property through the life of the bond issue or until 2016. Blackberry Farm acquisition included a total of 33 acres, 16 acres in the picnic facility and 17 acres in golf course. The Blue Pheasant restaurant is at the golf course site.
Mike and I are here at the retreat center overlooking the pools, and Mike's going to talk a little bit about the picnic areas and the operation of Blackberry Farm. Mike?
Blackberry Farm Picnic Grounds began operation in 1953 under private ownership. In 1991, the City of Cupertino purchased it and has been operating it ever since. The picnic ground season runs from May into October. It is open 100 days of the year. Many people come for company picnics, church gatherings, and family reunions. 75% attend on weekends, 25% on weekdays. Over 600 reservations are made annually. Of those reservations, 29% originate from San Jose, 16% from San Francisco, and 10% from Cupertino. 70% of the visitors come for planned picnics. 30% we call day trippers, who pay the general admission fee and spend the day. The picnic grounds operates as an enterprise fund. It'll generate over $800,000 annually with a net profit of $50,000 to $150,000. The excess revenue goes towards paying off the debt service and to finance capital improvement projects.
One of the council goals for the project is to provide a trail or trails through the corridor to accommodate a variety of users. This is difficult through Blackberry Farm under the current operating system where visitors pay an entry fee. The council recently concluded a review of the Stevens Creek Trail feasibility study, which was prepared by a task force over a 24-month period. The task force recommended that Blackberry Farm change the park operation and/or design to permit a trail alignment that would allow users to move closer to the creek. The trail would be more integrated within the park setting as opposed to isolated from the fee use area. The task force was challenged to recommend a design that fit the character of the park under the current entry fee collection system.
We're here in one of the group picnic areas at Blackberry Farm, and this is the area of the most intense public use. It's also one of the areas that is most closely aligned with the off-site neighbors. In your site analysis, it's imperative that you consider the impact of all of your design decisions on the outside neighbors, and remember that one of the council goals is to be sensitive to the off-site neighbors of the corridor.
A major draw at Blackberry Farm is picnicking, and there are 14 different picnic sites available to accommodate up to 4,000 people at one time. Many of the picnic sites are immediately adjacent to the creek. Some sites have horseshoe and volleyball courts.
We're here with Scott, Pat, and Jonna, and we're going to discuss some of the issues here at the picnic grounds at Blackberry Farm. We'll cover some of the fisheries issues, plants issues, and access issues. Scott will talk first about the fisheries.
Hi, we're standing actually at a low-flow road crossing here that connects one side of the park to the other, and it's one of a couple of similar structures within the footprint of the park that are slated for removal. As it turns out, these kinds of low-flow road crossings are a barrier for fish to migrate up and down in the system and prevent, in particular, juvenile fish from having good access to the kind of habitat that's available upstream. So these are probably coming out, and I think in the future you should probably envision other alternatives for access across the park. We've looked at projects all up and down Stevens Creek, and as it turns out, the two that are in the park footprint are probably two of the 5 worst barriers to passage within the whole Stevens Creek corridor from the bay all the way to the dam. So they're significant projects, and we're looking forward to working with the city of Cupertino to get them removed.
One of the things that we hope to be able to do here is to put in a lot more native plants. And we hope that these native plants will be watershed-specific native plants. Because the Bay Area has so many different little microclimates, the plants actually evolved differently in different watersheds. And so the plants that are the best suited to this locale and to the wildlife that are here would actually be Stevens Creek plants. And these plants should provide they should feed the proper bugs to feed the fish, and they also should be able to thrive in the climate that we have here. Here's Jana.
And the final thing to consider in these areas is that access in the past has been provided, and you're going to need to think about a sensitive design for access. And the more low-tech, potentially the more sensitive. So these low-flow crossings were used to get vehicles to the picnic areas. One might now consider bridges. The bridges need to be placed to allow flood debris to flow. And those bridges might only have to be large enough for maybe even a small electric vehicle or for a wheelbarrow to bring picnic goodies across. But give some thought to that. Also give some thought to allowing people to explore the creek in certain areas. We'll probably want a large buffer zone along the corridor where habitat can be restored, but then there should be some selected areas where children can come and adults can come and actually get their feet wet and enjoy the waters.
Pat, I can see a lot of concrete in the creek and a lot of rocks on the banks of the creek here. Could you speak to us a little bit about bank protection?
Sure. When we improve this impediment to fish passage, we're going to take out a lot of concrete and make the bottom much more natural so the fish can get up. But at the same time, we don't want to cause these banks to fail. We want the banks to stay strong. At the moment, it's all covered with hardscape. There's hardly anything growing out between those rocks, so they don't have a lot of habitat value. We found that it's possible to use more biotechnical methods where you use the roots of plants to provide the stability for the stream instead of such hardscape. And it provides shade to the stream and looks a little more aesthetically pleasing. But it can also be very, very strong, and that's what counts.
I'm standing in the parking lot for the Blackberry Farm picnic area, and this would be a good time to talk about designing for use and the amount of space that you have to devote to certain functions. In general, it's going to be better to design for the average use and then accommodate a peak use. If you always design for the peak use of an area, you end up having space that can be not utilized for other things. When you're thinking about designing a space such as a parking lot, an expansive parking lot such as this, in designing for average use, you're going to accommodate the people that normally come to the site during a given period. In accommodating peak use, you try to look for areas that can be double used. Look for instance, maybe a lawn area that could be doubled for parking, or maybe part of the parking lot can normally be used for picnicking and then turned over to parking when you have to accommodate a peak use. Another thing to look at when you're designing parking would be the type of vehicle that comes down. Obviously, you're going to design for cars because most people will arrive here by vehicle, but there are also a number of buses that use the area too. Providing areas for buses to park, places where they can easily turn around, places where they can circulate through the parking so they don't become an impediment to the other vehicular access. In-site analysis, when you come down to the site and take a look at this area, get a feel for how large it is. You can see it on the map, but until you stand out here, you don't get a real feeling for the size of the parking that's needed for the picnic areas here. This area could be put to better use, and in your site analysis and in your design, take into consideration that while you need to park people, you do not need to park them everywhere.
Blackberry Farm Golf Course began operation in 1963. In 1991, the city took over operation. A private contractor currently performs maintenance. The course is 9 holes, par 29, and the average use is 75,000 to 80,000 rounds annually. Approximately 80% of the use is by non-residents.
I'm here on the Blackberry Farm Golf Course with Mike O'Dowd, and we're going to talk a little bit about the course itself, plus some of the improvements that need to be made to the course. Mike?
There are 2 improvements that need to be made to the golf course. One is the installation of a new irrigation system and the addition of permanent restrooms. The golf course operates as an enterprise fund. It has over 75,000 rounds of golf annually and generates over $800,000 in revenue, with a net profit of $100,000 to $250,000. The excess revenue goes towards paying off the debt service and to fund capital improvement projects.
Here we have a historical marker. This marker was dedicated by the Cupertino Historical Society, the City of Cupertino, and several other organizations. This is a marker which represents Captain Elisha Stevens. Elisha Stevens was an early homesteader here in the Cupertino area and a blacksmith by trade. He was most famous for guiding the Murphy Party over the Sierra Nevada in 1844 with no casualties. And he owned several acres of property, which amounted to about 315 acres, which encompassed most of McClellan Ranch and Blackberry Farm. And what you see as the golf course here at one time was Elisha P. Stevens' property.
The Stocklmeir property was purchased in 1999 for $6 million. Blackberry Farm Golf Course borders the property to the east, and the Meadows Homeowners Association is to the west. There are 2 existing houses on the property that are currently being rented on a month-to-month basis. The entire property is just over 5 acres with 3 acres in citrus orchard.
Christine and I are here at the Stocklmeir property in the middle of this incredible orange orchard, and we're going to find out a little bit more about the property and who owned it. Christine?
The orchard that you see here and the buildings on the outskirts were the residence of Louis B. Stocklmeir. Mr. Stocklmeir was the official historian for Cupertino. He was given this honor in 1966 by the city. He lived here for a very long time, having first moved into the area in 1898 and then having moved to this property with his family in 1900. Louis B. Stocklmeir was of great historic value to the community. There are many letters, many pieces of documentation at the Historical Society which recount the vivid, colorful history of this area and of this land here.
Thank you, Christine. You know, when you're looking at something like an orchard, there's a couple things to remember. Orchards are beautiful. They're living things, and because they're living things, they have a lifespan. The trees here won't live forever, so when you're looking at the site to analyze it, think about that kind of a thing. If you're looking at an orchard, know a few things. You have to actively manage an orchard. It's not the kind of thing that will take care of itself. Someone has to come in, they have to prune the trees, they have to harvest the fruit, they have to take care of the trees, they have to take care of the ground around the trees. It's a tremendous amount of maintenance. In your site analysis, determine whether you want to maintain this as an orchard or perhaps as a hybrid use. You can maintain part of the orchard to harken back in history to the origins of this property and maybe turn the rest of the site into something that's multifunction. The other thing to remember about living things like orchards is that when the trees do start to decline, and since these trees were all planted at the same time, chances are they're going to go into decline at the same time. You'll have to replace them, or do you replace them? In the site analysis, if something has a lifespan, you need to factor that in.
The Blue Pheasant restaurant was purchased with a golf course in 1991. The building is 6,500 square feet, of which 5,500 are leased as cocktail lounge and restaurant. The remaining 1,000 square feet below the bar is used as the golf course pro shop. The restaurant leasee has exclusive right to all the food service. The current 10-year lease agreement will expire March 31, 2004.
I'm here with Steve Piasecki, the planning director for the city of Cupertino. Steve, could you discuss with us some of the land use issues with Blackberry Farm and the rest of the site?
Sure, Dave, thank you. This has got to be one of the most fascinating mixtures of land use issues that could come together. First of all, you have the Blue Pheasant restaurant that's been here forever, and what do you do with that? How do you deal with that? People have raised the issue of how do you handle access into the future Blackberry Farm, whatever that future ends up being. But I think more fundamentally is what is people's vision for this space? What are you going to do with it? And what is the most important thing that should happen with the Stevens Creek? And I think that has to be something with getting people access to it. It is an absolutely tremendous resource, and people in the whole community need to have access to the creek and along the creek. It's not unlike the Coastal Commission, where the state of California indicated they wanted access to the ocean. This is our resource. It's a great resource for this community. So all things should really focus around that issue. Everything else is, in my mind, is secondary to it. How do you get access to it? What kind of trail access makes the most sense? Singular, plural, bicycles mixed or not mixed? I think all of that even is secondary to getting good access to the creek. Anybody who's walked along it, it's beautiful, and you'll really enjoy it whenever we do get a trail access along it. So I think that is the fundamental issue in terms of land use.
Great, thanks, Steve. I think from a site analysis point of view, when you're looking at things like this, you have to take the entire site as a whole, not just take one end, start at one end and move to the other. A lot of times when you're looking at a site, it's very tempting to take a look at the hot spot on a site or the most contentious part of a site and then try to branch out your analysis from that. It's not useful in that it colors everything that you do, every way that you look at the site from thereafter. So when you're taking a look at this site, don't just take a look at the nature end of the site and analyze it from there, or not just the Blackberry side of the site and analyze it from there. Try to look at the whole thing on your map, and take each and every part, analyze it separately, and then merge all that information together before you start your design. Steve, I understand that access is a major issue on this site. Could you please speak to us just briefly about the access issues here?
Sure, Dave. Access is an issue because currently Blackberry Farm is accessed from Byrne Avenue. And there's been some discussion about the possibility of bringing access in off of Stevens Creek Boulevard right across from Farlap Drive. And that raises all kinds of questions about, well, what happens to the road? How does it follow along the creek? And what do you do with the road? And, you know, I think Glenn was going to be meeting me here for a game of golf today. Well, here is Glenn. Hey, Glenn, how you doing? This is ours. How are you? Yeah. Good to see you, Glenn.
Don't you want to play?
Yeah, I do want to play, but first he asked me a question about access into Blackberry Farm. And Glenn is our Assistant Public Works Director, and I'm sure he's thought about this. So what do you think about providing access off Stevens Creek instead of Byrne Avenue?
Well, you know, I'd say that it'd be a pretty good idea to probably come off of a major thoroughfare like Stevens Creek. Right now, it looks as though we got a pretty good access that's lined up with the street across here with Farlap. I think we have pretty good sight distance here too, Steve. I think from the west, we probably need to do a little bit of a study to see if our sight distance is adequate here. But I think really if we were to take a look at the impacts in the local area, we'd find that this should be a more preferable entrance to the existing one back through the neighborhood. Another thing you'd have to think about, though, I think, is even though you have a wide entrance here, you'd really have to take a look at the geometry of the roadway going over here and decide where you want to cross. You might have to do a creek crossing, because I think you'd probably disturb the action of the golf course. But all in all, this seems like a pretty good site.
Yeah. I think that issue you raised with the golf course is the big one, because obviously golf balls and the tops of cars and hoods of cars don't get along too well. So if you did have to cross the creek and try to stay away from the golf course, it may be possible. It's something worth exploring, perhaps. And it could be very beautiful. It could be a very nice, beautiful drive to actually wander along the creek, and maybe it can be used also for bike lanes, etc. So I think it's an interesting idea and ought to be pursued.
Okay. Well, you want to play now?
Let's go play. Let's
go
All
play.
Right. Come on, let's go.
We hope that you have found this video useful, and just to sum up, I think we should go back to the council's stated goals for the site. First off, being invite members of the community to enjoy the property in the corridor year-round to serve more people. And in your analysis and in your design, to serve more people, you might want to think beyond single uses. Serving more people usually means serving more kinds of people with more kinds of functions. Try to program in as many functions as you think that you can get in to serve the overall community. Minimize the effects of park operation on the surrounding residents. That was something we talked with Mike about. Be a good neighbor. Think about how people use the park, where they're going, the kinds of noises that they're going to make, the hours of operation, if there's light affecting. How people use the edges of the park too. The entire area, the entire site is bounded by private property, and try to be aware of how people will go to the edges and affect those private properties. We talked to John and Scott about preserving and restoring the natural environment of the creek corridor for park users and for a habitat for wildlife. With that, provide a trail compatible with the natural setting that will accommodate a variety of trail users. In analyzing the site, take a look at several alignments for everything. There's no one best alignment for any function, just as there's no one best spot for any one function. Try to look at the site and program for all of your functions, and then when you're designing a trail, try to make the trail connect those functions in the best possible way. And you may find that you have to do 3, 4, 5 different trail alignments to achieve your goals. Acknowledge and interpret the history of the area through a series of historical markers and through the preservation of the buildings at McClellan Ranch. We talked with Christine about that, and I hope you got a sense of the history of the place, a sense of the history of the buildings here, and how important it is to preserve the historical sense of the site. Encourage educational uses of the creek and corridor, and support environmental programming at McClellan Ranch. I think that Barbara very eloquently put how valuable the educational sources are here, and how many people she serves, and how the facilities need to accommodate the amount of people that she's serving now. She serves busloads of people, not just 2 or 3. And I think in your programming you have to acknowledge that fact, and also acknowledge the value of the environmental education. Analyze relocating the Blackberry Farm entrance to Stevens Creek Boulevard. We talked about that with Steve and Glenn. There are many issues that come with relocating the entrance to a major public facility. Be sensitive to all of the things that go into that. Not only the people that need to use the site, you have to be also sensitive to the people around the entrance. How is it going to affect the people that come from the surrounding subdivisions? How is it going to affect the people that are driving down Stevens Creek Boulevard? How is it going to affect the people coming out of the site as well as in? I hope that you can take this video. There will be a second video in your packet with information on programming and on the survey that was done for the project. And with the 2 videos, I hope that it will help you to make your designs as effective as possible. And I would also like to stress again, there is no substitute for coming down and visiting the site. There's no way that you can adequately display on paper the feeling of a site, the rhythm, the rise and fall of the land, the way that the trees cast shade, the air around you, the sounds of the birds. Come down, visit the site, get a good idea, design something, come down again and visit the site. In that way, you're going to be able to effectively present a solution to the council.
Thank you for participating in this exercise. We encourage you to take your site analysis base map and walk the area prior to one of our technical review meetings. Familiarize yourself with the property, and please watch the second video in the series for additional information on park operation, the community attitude survey, and creek restoration opportunities.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Bradford. On behalf of Cupertino's Parks and Recreation Commission, I want to thank you for your interest and participation in this process. The Stevens Creek Corridor is one of the city's most precious resources, and as you can see by watching the tape, there's a tremendous opportunity for restoration, repair, and recreation. The success of a project like this is really dependent upon the creative collaboration of the community. And we've been thrilled at the number of people in this community that have requested kits and are excited about participating in this process. We're looking forward to reviewing all of your submissions at our May 12th meeting. And finally, I just want to remind you that there's a second tape in your kit, and it contains presentations that were made to the Parks and Recreation Commission and the City Council. We hope that this information will be useful to you in putting together your vision of the Stevens Creek Corridor. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at the meeting on May 12th.